Welcome to my review of Turok Evolution for the Game Boy Advance. And in this game you can select between two playable characters. There's not much difference between them, but this bald-headed motherfucker right here, he's got a stronger melee attack, and I think his jump is a little shorter. But I think one of the reasons I chose him was because I like this melee attack for fucking shit up, close. You can really pull a lot of bullshit with that. So it is worth experimenting with the characters, even though the differences aren't huge. It can be enough to make a difference. Now, I don't remember if you can select characters, change characters at any point mid-game or after you die or anything like that. So you may be committed to the character you choose. The game is a little bit hazy for me because I beat it a while ago. And all this footage is from my playthrough and my tutorial of the game, which I'll link to in the description. And that goes into more gameplay details when everything was fresh in my mind. So, if you're interested in actually working on the game, that's going to be the video to check out. I don't think there's really a lot of information on this game, so you may find it worthwhile. There was a lot of exploits and tricks that I found. So you do have a lot of weapons that you can select from as you pick them up in the field, and you use kind of a weapon wheel to select your weapons. I believe if you hit select, you can also alternate between alien versions of the weapons, which I don't even know if I knew about that when I beat the game. I read that in a game fact because I was trying to refresh my memory a little bit since I haven't played this in a while. But basically you have passwords for each stage, and you just need to make it to the end of each stage, and that's pretty much it. And the only other variation you have between the side-scrolling levels is these overhead or behind the back view type of levels, kind of like NOM 1975 or Operation Wolf style shooter kind of levels and shit like that. And they play okay, but the problem is that when you're trying to move your reticle around, you also move your character. And I don't believe you can lock your character into place and just move the reticle, so it is a little awkward when you're trying to do dodging and firing on specific body parts of a boss at the same time. One way I negate some of that, I find that jumping around a lot in this game on some parts will actually make the enemies. It makes it very hard for the enemies to hit you and land a hit. So it's a weird exploit that I found. I actually set my jump button to rapid fire on a few stages, and I just hold that down and hop through the levels, constantly hopping and firing at the same time. It's an awkward thing that I found, but I'm usually pretty good at finding AI exploits and shit like that to exploit games. And that's how I normally play games. If I find any little breaks in the system, I will exploit it. And I like to show that kind of shit in tutorials. I think it gives them a unique unique style. I don't see a lot of tutorials that go into a lot of exploitative methods in games, and I cover that kind of shit pretty frequently in my tutorials. So yeah, that was another one of the. There was a boss fight in that behind the back type of view stage, and like you can see, it is kind of a pain in the ass because you can't move your reticle separately from your character. So it is a little bit clunky, at least to me. I didn't like those stages as much, but they're okay. They're decent, but they can be a little frustrating for the wrong reasons. You do have good mobility. You can shoot up. You have, a good variety of weapons. You actually have a lot of weapons in the game. You see on this weapon wheel how many different weapons I have. A number of them I haven't even picked up at this point, as you can see. A lot of them were grayed out. You also can pick up some health sometimes, so that helps. The game can be pretty relentless with how aggressive the enemies are and the enemy spawns are. So you got to kind of figure out your path and how to kind of bullshit your way through the game. And sometimes it does feel clunky because enemies take, way more hits than they should, and you'll have a lot of them. So you got to kind of either stop in place and try to kill them while other enemies are swarming you, like you see here, which is a little ridiculous. I mean, it's kind of sloppy feeling. Or your other alternative is what I do at certain points in the game where you see me hopping through the game, which is pretty much an exploit that I found in the game. It's not really, I'm sure it's not the way you're intended to play the game, but it works. And it makes the game a little bit more manageable for sure. Otherwise, it can be irritating to be, stopped dead in your tracks with enemies that take way too many hits, and then you have other bullet sponge enemies swarming you, because all those enemies that were swarming me were also bullet sponge enemies that take a lot of hits. So, you can see how that's kind of a bad game design, If you're going to have enemies swarm, they shouldn't be enemies that take multiple hits each, a lot of hits each. You just don't have the time to take them out before taking damage. So there's some sloppy shit like that. It's not the tightest game, but the control is pretty good. The game can be a little bit too zoomed in at times, since it's a portable game. It can be a little bit too zoomed in where you can't always see everything that you'd like to see. Sometimes you feel like shit is right on top of your ass, you know what I mean? But here I'm exploiting the jumping thing that I figured out here, where you can set a button to rapid fire. The jump button, you can set it to rapid fire and kind of just fucking hop through shit. Now, sometimes you got to do more precise platforming, and you can't just, bounce through each level. But, at this stage in the game, I started figuring out how useful that little technique was, and I started using it a lot and kind of just jumping through stages to avoid a lot of damage. See, I'm skipping a lot of shit by doing this. So the game is exploitable, for sure. And it's still a pretty tough game, even when you do this kind of shit. It's a challenging game. Sometimes for the wrong reasons, though. You know what I mean? It's not all the best gameplay. But this version of Turok Evolution is the only one, I believe, that's a side-scrolling game. All the other ones, as far as I can tell, are just a standard 3D Turok game. So it's kind of cool that you get an exclusive side-scrolling action game from this version, It's definitely a cool game worth checking out because it's easy to miss. You might think that the GBA one was trying to be a first-person shooter, as a few GBA games did try to do, which is really not a good platform to try to put a first-person shooter on. But, some of them tried to do it anyway. This was a much better choice for the Game Boy Advance, going with a side-scrolling action game. So, see, some of these hits, it's kind of hard to hit the bosses as you're moving and the reticle's moving at the same time. Like I said, you don't have independent control over the reticle and your character, so you got to move both at the same time. So managing that, it's kind of irritating because you want to lock on to what you're shooting, but you can't really do that. You have to do everything you have to handle both movements, the reticle and your character, at once on those stages. So it's really not optimal. So here I have an invincibility power up. That's why I'm just running through these guys. So you can get those occasionally. You can see a dinosaur was chasing me in the beginning, so there's a little variety there where you're getting chased sometimes, but most of the time you're just fucking, barraging through tons of enemies and skipping as much shit as you can. At least that's how I play. I try to skip any enemies I can skip. But sometimes it is better to fight. And you have a lot of weapons you can switch between on the fly, so you have a lot of variety, which is a strong point of the game. The hits are nice, you got some nice little fucking blood effects and shit, and the hits look good. The enemies look pretty cool. So all the design is pretty cool as far as the way the game looks. The sound is not really too standout. I don't remember the music being that, that memorable or anything, but it was serviceable for the game. It was good enough. Sometimes the platforming does feel a little jittery with the way the camera moves and being all zoomed in. It can feel a little spastic to me at times. But for the most part, you get used to it. You also have a screen clearing attack that I believe you can save up by hitting, I believe, both trigger buttons at the same time, but I don't remember the controls exactly. Some of these boss fights also draw on for too long. I mean, especially if you're not using a powerful enough weapon. Some of these fights can take super long, like, several minutes easily just for a single form of a boss. So some of them are way drawn out. I mean, that was something I didn't really like. I felt like some of that shit just went on for too long, and it became repetitive and kind of frustrating. But of course, I will go over, all the tactics I used in the tutorial. That'll explain everything I did and, what weapons you might want to use. Of course, I didn't find the optimum path through the game. This was just me. The tutorial is just explaining how I beat the game. You know what I mean? I never went back and tried to refine this game. Some of my tutorials I will go back and refine and do no damage on all the sections and all that shit. But for this, I just beat it. And then I edited out the deaths from my playthrough. And then over that version, I added the commentary and just explained what I did. But still, it should give you a good idea of how to handle all the sections and various areas where you can pull bullshit and skip shit. Things like that. I also go into detail how long the game took me to beat. I don't remember exactly how long this one took me. I didn't look it up before making this review. But it did take some hours. It was definitely, it's not a super hard game, but it's decently difficult. It's probably on the high moderate difficulty, you know what I mean? Like, close to being kind of hard. But it does give you unlimited continues and passwords, so you can at least start the levels from the beginning. And the levels are usually not that long, but they can be pretty dense. So here I'm using a different character, so I guess there must be a way to switch characters. Maybe by going in and putting in the level password. I think that might let you switch characters if you want to. And I don't remember exactly why I switched characters here. I may have found them useful for some reason. There are, like I said, there are certain differences between the characters. And some of those differences may be good enough for certain parts that you may want to, use different characters. This is the final boss rush, and this part's kind of irritating because the forms can take pretty long to beat. They can drag on for a while, and you do have this shitty control here where you have to move your character and the reticle at the same time, so it can make dodging irritating when you're trying to keep your reticle on the enemy and work on just shooting the enemy, but you have to move in order to dodge shit. So, I didn't really like that too much. It was playable, but it was just kind of irritating. I thought it could have been done a lot better. They should have just copied what something like, Nam 75 did. The controls on that game are awesome. They should have just straight out stole that shit. But I mean, it's still decent enough. I mean, it's not that bad, but it could be a lot better. But there's a decent variety of gameplay, and there's a lot of different enemy types. So, I mean, it's definitely a solid game. It has a lot of variety. It was a lot better than I expected for some random Turok game. I never really, from what I played of the 3D Turok games, they didn't seem like games that I would like. Though, to be fair, I never gave them much of a choice. But I really wasn't feeling the fucking N64 back in the day. So, when I rented those, I didn't think much of them because I really wasn't enjoying the games on that system too much. So I may have been overly critical at the time. I haven't revisited them in many, many years. But I'm guessing that I'll probably like this one more than any of those 3D games. So this was cool to see an original side-scrolling game for the GBA, an exclusive. So here the melee attack I found worked really well for that head. And if you get into a rhythm with it, you can kind of just keep striking the head as it appears in strike range. And then you finish off with this dinosaur, which is another recycled boss. So the thing is, this game does recycle bosses quite a few times. Which for me is always a downside of a game. Like when they do boss rushes or recycle bosses, I'm not really big into that. And a lot of games do that, especially older games. But this game really wasn't that old at the time. So really, it would have been better if it just had unique bosses for some of these parts. But it's still a pretty cool fight. But like I said, kind of irritating with the control scheme that you have on these behind the back type of stages. I believe you have to complete all 3 or 4 of these final forms without, on the same life bars. You have to do well. So it can be kind of a tricky way to finish off the game. Because as you can see, some of these forms take a lot of hits. And I'm showing the full final boss fight at the end of this review, so you can see that now. But yeah, overall, I thought this was a pretty solid game with some nuisances, some annoyances that kind of bring it down for me. But it's pretty solid. It's a decent length. So it's definitely one I would recommend checking out. If you're not familiar with it, you'll probably enjoy it for the most part. Just expect some frustration, some parts that are a little sloppy. I mean, it's not the best executed platformer or, action game, side-scrolling action game, but it's pretty good. I would say it's a solid 7 out of 10 for me. I think it's a good, solid game. And definitely worth checking out. If you haven't, if you're not familiar with this game, it's definitely one that's worth checking out. But as you can see, this fight, it can go on for a while. And all the little damage you take can really add up. So you do want to practice, each form individually with save and load states on an emulator just to get them down and have everything down. That's what I always recommend with these kind of games is practicing, isolated practice with save and load states on an emulator. It's not a requirement, but it will speed up the process if you can do efficient practice. So yeah, let me know if you have any questions, and thanks for watching.